What's up, everybody? I am joined in this episode by Dr. Paul Kachoris, who has done a number of things with the men's movement really since the 90s. And so we're going to hear about his perspective on what masculinity has looked like through his lifetime, really what happened in the 80s and the 90s, why things stalled out when it came to the men's movement. Hear a lot about Victories of the Heart and other organizations that really help men step into this whole other side of us. And really help us wake up. We're going to talk about the archetypes of different parts of or energies of being a man. We're going to talk a little bit about Carl Jung. We're going to talk about things like the male development schemas. What does that even mean? What does that look like? And ultimately, like, what are these midlife crises, or as Paul likes to call it, midlife passages that we go through as men? So lots of good stuff. I learned a ton of new things, and I know that you will too. Make sure that you leave us a review, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned so you get all the goodness as we continue to put out great shows and build this community. So with that, let's jump in.
Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's show. We've got another great one for you. Like always, I just found myself, as that intro was playing, nodding my head. I think I really lucked out finding a guy that can make some good jams, make things sound very legit to kick things off. So today we are going to talk about many things as usual, but today's discussion really centers around the stages of development that we go through as men and how they kind of end up feeling like a number of midlife crises as we're developing through the years as guys. And so today I am joined by Dr. Paul Kachoris. He's been a psychiatrist for over 50 years, working with children, adolescents, and adults, and he still runs his private psychiatric practice today, which he told me earlier that as of March 13th, he will have been doing it fully virtual for over a year because of the pandemic, which is just wild that it's been a year for some of these changes for a lot of us. And so since 1990, Paul has been involved with men's work, co-leading men's weekend retreats with Victories of the Heart, which is a cool organization we talked about with Jonathan Domanis early on in the show. His professional interests besides his private practice are men's studies, men's retreats, neuroscience, humanities, and writing poetry. He's also the father of 2 sons and 1 daughter, and a grandfather of 5 grandsons and 4 granddaughters, which is incredible. So with that, Paul, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing good. As we spoke a few minutes ago, I was thinking to myself, I can't believe it's been a year. So you got me to think about what this year has been like, and particularly for myself and from my family, because we've been kind of separated from each other, and also for all of the patients that I I've not been able to see face to face, but the help that they've needed, because it's been very difficult for all of us, and not only for us professionals, but all of us, our children, men and women, the depression, the anxiety, the isolation. And I was thinking too about the fact that we haven't been able to run any men's retreats for this last year. As we were talking, we usually run 4, 5, 6 retreats a year. We haven't been able to do any of them because they're out in camps around Chicago. They're weekend retreats. So what we've done is we've tried to offer virtual. Um, you can't replicate the weekends, but we offer mini experiences for the men, and roundtables and different projects. So it's impacted all the work that we've done with the men.
I can imagine, but it seems like you guys have really been as flexible as you can be. Earlier, you were telling me that you had one of the guests that was on our show showed up for Victories. It sounds like Ed Fraunheim did a group session with you guys earlier this week, or was it today?
He did it just last Saturday. He did it. We had about 40 men, and we had a round table, and he came and he spoke to us about masculinity, healthy masculinity. It was really great because he spoke, then we broke down into small groups and we discussed certain questions, and then we went back again. It was very, very, very powerful. So we have we've had those experiences that we try to offer on weekends. We also have what Victories has done is that we have these campfires, and the campfires. We've opened it up to all the men who have gone through. Our program has been going on now since 1985, so we have several thousand of men, and we opened it up to all the alumni. And we have four campfires. We have one on Monday night, one on Tuesday morning, one on Thursday night, and one on Saturday morning. And they're basically some of us weekend leaders meet, and any man who wants to drop in. So it's an hour and a half. And basically, the format is any man who's out there, any man who's out there who doesn't have any connections, we invite them. So we've had quite a good turnout between these four campfires. They go for an hour and a half, and the structure is a man just checks in, talks about what he's feeling. We've had probably about maybe 70 to 100 men drop in every week, and that's another way that we're trying to keep current until we're able to start up again. Hopefully, maybe by the fall. We have to wait until the vaccine and the clearance.
Hmm. That's really fantastic. I mean, and I'm not surprised that you've had such a solid turnout for those events because, like you were mentioning earlier, the pandemic has made us more aware than I think we ever have of the need to care for ourselves in so many different ways. And it's great that there are organizations like Victories out in the world. So I'll make sure after the show to get some links to all the different ways that guys who might be listening could get involved with Victories, and we'll put those on the webpage that we talked about earlier.
Oh, I appreciate that very much because it's a really a very Victories has been very important. The reason I've stayed connected with it is because it was a major uh, it was a major experience for me because I went through Victories as a participant in 1990, and it was very, very powerful. It affected my life actually. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that it saved my life. It helped me. It turned my life around because I was very down, and just because I'm a psychiatrist doesn't mean that I don't have problems and emotions. I do. I'm like anybody else. But I had my own stuff to work out through, and I think even though I had been in therapy for myself, when I did this weekend, the Victories weekend, it was really shattering for me, shattering in a good way. It broke me out of my old kind of way of being a man, and it helped me to recognize about the fact that I could have a heart and I could be connected. And I think connection is what Victories offers more than anything. Is being able to connect men to men. I think we men live isolated and we're connected. And I was very isolated as a physician, and I got connected, and I formed a group of really close brothers.
That really resonates with me. Did you do anything before you had your first weekend with Victories? Like, what was the catalyst for you wanting to go and do a weekend retreat?
That's a great question. I think you're going to interview Kevin Fitzpatrick next, and he and he was working on my psychiatric unit in the hospital. He's a social worker, and he was working on this unit. There was a unit for inpatient for children, and he was one of the social workers there. So he and I've known him for years, and he started talking to me about Victory. So, and he said, "You got to do this program." This was like a couple of years before, and I know you're going to get a kick out of this because I do. I said, "Oh, I don't do that stuff." I said, "That's not for psychiatrists." That's not for psychiatrists. That's for you social workers and psychologists. We psychiatrists don't need that. He said, "I think you'd like it." Well, he had done it, and he was after me to do it. So I finally did it, and of course, it was because of his not not forcing me, but kind of she said, "You got to do it." So that's how I got into it, and that's and that's the honest truth. Because I don't think I would have done it if he hadn't been after me. So that goes to show you, though, that we men have an effect on other men. I never thought about it until now. The biggest way that we sell victories is that one man who has done it, they talk to their brother, their real brother, or a friend, and so many of our referrals come from one man, getting after another man. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of it for me, I would describe that as trust, right? Is that you trust somebody enough and you know them well enough to be able to say to share something that's vulnerable. Going on a weekend retreat to crack yourself open and dig deep inside of yourself and really explore compassionately, like that's a hard thing to do, and it's an even harder thing to go and share with other people. But when you've got that trust and you had a really great experience, it makes it a lot easier.
Uh, I think so, and I trusted Kevin, and so I that's exactly right. It is about trust. And the integrity too. There's a lot of fear. What I have found since, and I realized my resistance back then was that I was fearful, and like what it was going to be. And I think also there's a thing about fear about changing. I find that when I work with people professionally as a psychiatrist, because I work with children, adolescents, adults, I work with families. I think that the biggest thing is fear of change. I think it's very hard, and I think it's trusting someone and also having them kind of allay your fears. Don't it's going to be okay. I think that's also a very important piece.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that makes sense because we're all afraid of so many things, whether we like to admit it or not. And I think you hit on two of the big ones. Yeah, change is certainly one of them that stands out to me. Had, I'm curious, were you present to men's work or men's movements or masculinity at all before your work with Victories?
No, it was very peripheral in my life. I wasn't really very. That's that was not my orbit. I once I did victories. I got very much connected with Iron John and the other men's organization. So that's when I began to do the exploration. It's not something that we at that time in history anyway, psychiatrists or psychologists, even social workers, that was not really part of the education. Gender studies were not the big thing back then. It was beginning in the 80s and 90s, but uh, I think that no, it was not part of my experience, and it was all new for me. I did explore uh, Robert Bly, and I did more weekends after I did the my first weekend. I ended up doing the Mankind Project a year later, and then I went to some retreats that Robert Bly had. So I also went out to California, and I did a weekend a shadow weekend, which was about Jungian's idea about the face that we show the world, and then the other face that we kind of keep behind. The shadow is not necessarily a bad thing; it's just things that we keep to ourselves that we don't want other people to see. So I present one kind of face to you, but there's another part of you that I keep behind, and so it's kind of like Jekyll and Hyde in a way. And so I did that.
Mm,
So I explored a lot of myself as a man, not as a therapist. I ended up, I was able to kind of separate. I never thought about it this way. I was able to take my psychiatry stuff person and put it aside, and I developed this other part of myself as a man, and I realized that even in a lot of this formal training, that who I was as a man was kind of separated from what I was presenting. But I found that over the years, my psychiatry self was really influenced, and I became a better therapist because I went through the men's work. It gave me a better connections to work with men and with children, and I really think it enhanced my effectiveness by doing that. But to answer your question, no, I never, not until I did Victories that it was not my part of my training.
That's some really amazing stuff, man. I think that idea that this self-discovery or discovering other parts of you helped you be a better, in your profession is
Exactly.
something that is just starting to get talked more about. Whereas it feels like up until this point, it's been more about how are you investing in yourself professionally? How are you growing as a, executive, a leader, a manager, a psychiatrist, a doctor, whatever, when in fact it's like, yeah, you should invest in those things too, and also invest in the development of yourself, because that can enhance, or in some cases shift and change, the professional side of you. What do you think about what's happening right now with the men's movement and differing new definitions of masculinity? What's your take on everything that's going on right now?
I think, well, I'm excited. I'm finding that I grew up in a very different era than you have. And back then, I think I was really locked into what it was to be an American male 50, 60 years ago. That was to be closed, isolated, the Marlboro man, uh, uh, keeping one's feelings to yourself, never expressing vulnerability, never really showing that you had any other than being a hard ass and succeeding. And succeeding was working hard, making money, all that very isolated. Uh, and I find that today, particularly, and you're an example actually, is that so many men in their 20s and 30s and 40s uh, are I think it's already seeped into the culture. So I think that much more young men, when they have children, they take care of their little babies. They are part of the being vulnerable and being open and showing a different part of themselves. Because I really think that young little boys and little girls, when they're born, you can't tell the difference when they're 2, 3, 4. Little boys run around, little girls run around. Okay, you walk into a room and they're all running. You see the boys are screaming and hollering and fighting just like the girls. What happens is back then, and I think it's still here, but I think it's getting better. What happens is that little boys, when they go to kindergarten, first, second, third grade, there's a split, and the split is, and I learned it myself because I realized that I could be vulnerable and cry at home, but God forbid if I cried on the playground.
Hmm.
The king of the hill. You had to, and so what splits is, it's not that we men are not emotional. We are. We're just like, we're human. But our culture says, well, to be in a man in the American culture, you got to do this, and the girls separate. So in our culture, particularly, I think I at least I grew up in a very very rigid separation. Is that this is what men and American men do? You're competitive, you're aggressive, you got to get out and it doesn't matter about anybody else. You just got to get to the top. And at least that was a very competitive, our culture. It was a very competitive culture, and so I think all that gets kind of built in. So little boys, when they get to be 5, 7, 8, 10, 15. So what I've seen, back to your original question, is um, I'm seeing that that's breaking down. I'm seeing the young men and women, when they have their children, particularly young fathers, they're I was a better father than my father, and I've watched my two sons, and they're better fathers than I was, which is good. I mean, something happened. that they were there earlier in changing the diapers, where I would change the diaper once in a while. They have shifts, and so what I'm saying to you is I'm seeing it all along the way. Eh, So that's kind of my observation, and I think the men's movement was very powerful. Like between 1985, I got into it in 1990, and I between 1985 and maybe 1995. Um, it was very strong those years between 90 and 1990, almost to 2000. But what happened, which is really fascinating, was that after a while, the media began to make fun of Robert Bly and the men drumming in the woods and hugging trees. They shamed the men. The worst thing that we men can have is to be shamed. And they shamed the men's movement out of existence. And it never really grew like the women's movement, because the women's movement was going on in the 70s and the 80s. So then Robert Bly came along, and he opened up the doorway with Iron John, and so the men's movement was really getting very powerful. But I remember Time Magazine and Newsweek, they had pictures of men hugging, naked men kind of hugging, and then they shamed the men's movement out of existence. That's what I saw.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you that today because you've got that perspective. I've been, in all my conversations and research, I've been trying to figure out like what happened, because it seemed like it had such good momentum and then it just died. And now it's almost like it's trying to come back. And yeah, shame is, gosh, that is just another one of those dangerous things, isn't it?
I don't want to be shamed. No man. None of us men want to be made to be weaklings. And I won't use the word that starts with the P. That none of us men want that. That's abhorrent. And so, no matter whatever this, so I'm glad we're talking about this, because it was shocking to me that I thought it was going to go somewhere, and then by the year 2000, it died. And so we've continued the Mankind Project with Victories and other men's organizations, but we've been kind of pushed to the periphery.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I heard about you and about all the other things that are happening, this book, reinventing man, it's coming back. Uh, I'm happy that it's coming back. I'm glad to see it come back again. That's when I found out about you, I said, well, this is cool that you're out there doing things, and the best thing you're doing, though, I think, Adam, is the fact that you're looking to connect. I think it's the connection now, connecting all the different parts of the country and in the world where our men are doing this work, because I think the kind of work you're doing is a way of maybe resurrecting it, maybe in a new form. I'm not quite sure, but I think that the key, it's interesting, by my historical perspective, the key to it now is to make it healthy masculinity. I think talking about healthy masculinity, uh, that we can still be strong, I can still be decisive, I can take charge, I can do all the things that we love being the male. I mean, I love being a male. I like all the stuff. I like the prerogatives of it all. But I think what's happened is we also have to be able to be compassionate, to be kind, to not need to put people down so that I can be up to feel up. The disaster that we've seen in this country. I mean, the example of toxic masculinity. I don't need to show you what's happened. We've been living in this toxic masculinity for 4 years. It's abhorrent to me. So I could be strong, I could be kind, I could cry, what does it mean that I can't really defend myself? And if I have to fight to kill you, if I have to protect myself. But what I'm saying is those qualities of our masculinity don't go away because we allow the sensitive part, the part that our mothers taught us when we were little boys. Okay, because I thank God for my mom, because I'm able to find that part of me that I had to bury when I was a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
The tyranny of the playground That's what I was good. We boys, it's called. There's been papers written about that, the tyranny of the playground. So I think I was able to. I think what Victories did for me, and I think it does for all of men, is that it allows us to touch our heart. It takes away the defense. And so part of our Victories of the Heart, our breakthrough weekend, which is our first weekend, it's called the breakthrough weekend. And it's called the breakthrough weekend because we're able to break through this armor and find our heart. So the whole thing about our weekend is about connection and coming from your heart and speaking your own truth.
Yeah, I love that. I was talking to a friend this week about just kind of how I've been doing recently, and he was like, you know, I'm listening, read some of the stuff that you've written about, and it sounds like you're just so much in your head. Like you were at your best at it when you're in here. You're coming from your heart. And I was just like, in that moment, you have those things that people say to you, or you have those realizations that just hit you like a ton of bricks, and you're like, yeah, that's it.
That's exactly right. It's really about the heart. Um, so I think that's probably the most important piece about the men's movement is that uh, we were shamed not to show our heart. That's what killed the men's movement. It's no, and I think what's happening is and I think coming at it through a healthy masculinity and defining all the positives of what it means to be and I think that's why what the two Eds are doing in their book and what you're doing and what we're doing, we're all trying to bring it back again.
That we are, and we will certainly make it happen. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I guess not a huge gear switch, but I want to talk about male development, which
Okay.
is something that it sounds like you have a lot of experience with. You've researched it, you've explored it a little bit. So there was I'm going to pull this up in the notes that you sent me. You mentioned this term male developmental schemas, birth to 80s. What is that? What does male developmental schemas mean?
Okay, that's great. I'll tell you. Over the years, because I got interested, I went back and did research, and much had been written, but that I was not aware of. Probably the most important person to talk about first is Erickson. Eric Erickson wrote a book many years ago. He called it Childhood and Society, and he was the first psychologist to describe the idea that we human beings go from 0 to 80 or 90. And he was the first professor. I had learned about him kind of tangentially when I was doing my child and adolescent psychiatric training, because we had to learn um, developmental schema. We had to learn, I was a pediatrician before I became a psychiatrist. So you learn where a little baby walks, crawls, walks, is able to ride a tricycle. There are so these developmental milestones that you have with your children. You watch them, go through the. What Erickson said is not only do we have them when we're little, but we have them, and he defined them as 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 70, 80, 90. Anyway, so, and he said that there are certain, and I'm quoting directly from him, and any of your viewers can look him up. But he was the first one to speak about that, and he had, and there are like certain developmental tasks. You're supposed to accomplish certain things. For the first, so what Erickson said is that between 0 and 18 months, it's about establishing trust, learning how to. So the way the way we're handled as little children are so trusting and intimacy and connectedness. So we learn those kind of values, and then we learn how to. Then we have to learn how to take initiative. So these are all developmental kind of milestones. Initiative. Then when we get to be uh, 5, 6, 7, 8. He speaks about being industrious and being able to accomplish. And then when we get to be in our 20s, he talked about identity. And then he went on to develop. We have to have identity. How do we identify who we are between our 20s and 30s? And then we develop during the 20s and 30s, for instance, the developmental schema is all about we develop the capacity for intimacy and the capacity for finding our place in the world. So anyway, so that was the concept of the developmental schema. So I took that and I basically did research with different authors to see how they, and I tried to apply it to the male development. Uh, and So there was childhood and society. There was another a psychiatrist named George Valiant, and he wrote a whole book on triumphs and experience. He studied men, Harvard men from 1930. He took a group of Harvard graduate men in 1938 or 39, and he followed them for up into their 90s. And he was able
wow.
to, yeah, it was a fascinating, it was a fascinating what makes men successful. How do we? And he looked at it mental health wise. He looked at it our physical health, and so that is another. So I took that perspective, and then there's another psychiatrist named Daniel Levinson, and he wrote a book called The Seasons of a Man's Life. And again, I tried to go back. So I read about him, and what I did I developed a schema, which with different authors, and my thing that the only thing original for me was I put it together, but these are all these other authors' ideas, and so he developed. For instance, he talks about between 10 and 20, it's childhood and adolescence. Then between 20 and 30 is early adolescence. And then he breaks it down into different, early adolescence, late adolescence, and then he talks about early adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood. So the idea of schemas is there are certain developmental tasks. The big one that was probably most significant for me was when I was doing the Victories. We found that the men that we usually get who come in is that they reach somewhere between 35 and 50. There is this movement. It's called a midlife passage, and if you look at psychiatric statistics, depression, that's the high for most men between 35 and 50. You have a high rise of depression. You have a higher rate of suicide, and that's a very tumultuous moment for men in our culture anyway, between 35 and 50. And the man that really was very influential for me, because a lot of this work is not mine, but I went around just reading everything and being enlightened, and so James Hollis, he's a Jungian analyst, and he wrote a wonderful little book called The Midlife Passage. And he wrote the book called From Misery to Meaning in Midlife. And he spoke very much about how we men, somewhere between 35 and 50, we've lived our life a certain way. That's what happened to me, actually. I was living my life a certain way. And so I was in my late 40s. And somehow I'll use myself as an example, but it's indicative of many men. we've lived one life, and by the time we get to be 35 or 40, we begin to wonder, is this the life I want? Is this really who I am? On and on and on. And so then you get this midlife crisis about how to find more of yourself.
Yeah.
And so if that makes any sense. So our program, Victories, our breakthrough weekend is really men between it peaks between 35 to 50.
Hmm.
Most of the men come in then. Either they're depressed, they've been divorced, they're isolated, they've been fired from their work, they've had a heart attack, uh, something that has brought them some kind of, hey, something is not right, whatever that is. And sometimes it's a divorce, or sometimes the wife says, if you don't go get help, I'm leaving you. So then that's the ultimatum. There's a lot of men who come because women, they're ahead of us. They never had to block their emotional self. Therefore, they're intelligent and they can succeed in the world, but they haven't shut off the emotional piece. We men shut that off. And so it's about waking up. So this midlife, these weekends are geared around having men reclaim themselves. So that's and so that is part of the way that we've structured Victories. Is the breakthrough weekend is about that, and then we have another experience, which is the shadow weekend, which is about having men, once you know who you are and how you've suffered in your own life. The shadow weekend is about having you figure out what are you carrying that you're hurting yourself or other people. So that's the negative piece. And then after that, we have the weekend, which is the best self weekend. So what's the best part of ourselves to celebrate the good pieces? So, and then we have the wisdom years, and that's our own. That's at the end of the whole thing. The wisdom years is our men who are in their late 50s, early 60s, and this is about. So now, what are you going to do at the end of your life? So we've structured our programs to kind of follow in line with this developmental schema that I'm describing.
That's really cool. I didn't know that that's how you guys had organized your programs, but now that makes a ton of sense. And I also can't help but think, as I just turned 34 and I feel like I'm in the middle of what is the term, midlife?
I'm going to give it a good name: midlife passage.
Midlife passage. I was like, I know midlife crisis.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
also called midlife crisis. But you don't have to have a crisis to go through the passage. The passage is a normal moment where you should really consider yourself, because you're halfway through. You got a lot of years to go, and you got to decide, do I like what I am? Are there pieces of me that I want to claim that I couldn't claim? There were a lot of pieces of myself. Again, I use myself. Forgive me. I don't want to be talking about myself, but it's a kind of, I use myself as an example because there were a lot of things that I put aside to go through pre-med, to become a doctor. You had to put a lot of stuff aside that I love doing. I didn't have time for anything other than just getting through school. So I had to go back. Part of that, what happened to me was I needed to go back. I went back and I reclaimed things like I love poetry. I love art. I love all that stuff. You can't do that you can't do that because you have to. So at your stage now, and you can enlarge yourself.
yeah, that's really what it feels like. There's almost these moments that start opening up sometime in your late 20s, early 30s, where it's like the passage opens. It's like, here, you've got your little chance. Do you want to go and do something differently? You want to make some different choices, express more of yourself. And then, it never really closes, but sometimes it feels like it closes. And then those passages keep opening up until, maybe you get to your late 40s, early 50s, when at that time it really does become a crisis because you've had that heart attack, you're going through a divorce, your kids hate you, you hate your job. You're like, I'm halfway through this thing called life now. Like, what the heck am I doing here? I don't have any other choice but to now I'm in a crisis. Like, I really have to go and do something about it. How can Have you found anything with all the work that you've done that for men who are maybe seeing those little passages open up that can help them step into it?
That's so interesting. Uh, we've been looking at uh, what do we do with young men between 20 and 30? Maybe that's what you're talking. I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question directly, but we've been thinking about uh, um, uh, emerging adulthood. And I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, uh, because where we've been looking at, can we do something as far as offering any kind of a program for young men who are between 20 and 30? 20 and 30 is a very important time developmentally because you're looking for your own personal identity. You're looking for intimacy. Can you form an intimate relationship with a significant other, be that male or female? uh, where is your role in the world? So 20 to 30 is a very hard time, and particularly now, it's really hard to be in your 20s because you got to get a job, you got to break away from your home, you got to figure out who are you. Uh, that's a very tough time between 20 and 30. Many times, men at between 20 and 30, either they have a job, they may be married, they may start having children, but I'm not so sure. Am I answering your question? I want to make sure I'm following up.
I think you are to some extent in that there's opportunities early on for us to start paying more attention to these things. But what I was also trying to get at was it's almost like as men, and I'm not saying this is just for men, but since this is the context of our conversation today,
Of course.
it's like we spend so much of our lives like a switch flips, and we spend our lives not trying to figure out who we are as humans, but fixing and achieving and protecting and doing all these things that don't really help us get in touch with who we really are. And then there's these moments when we get older where it's like, hey, these things that I've been doing don't really feel right anymore, but I don't know what to do about them. That are those opportunities to kind of have that passage, if you will, and kind of come back to yourself or come home to yourself, if you will, and really start to explore what that looks like. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, if you are there other signs that you can look for before you have an actual crisis, like a heart attack or a
Oh, okay.
divorce, to
Uh,
like say, hey, I can do something different. Like I have a choice now.
I don't know. I mean, I'm being honest. I don't really know. I don't really know how to. The first idea that popped into my head is our here's the question. Does our American culture allow that opportunity for men, or is it the idea of what it means to be a male in America that says precludes that you shouldn't think that or not? See, so that's really a very complicated. It's a great question. The problem is I don't know the answer, but I always like to have answers. Okay, but I don't. At this point in my time, at your age, I felt that I needed to have answers. At my age, oh well, I don't have an answer, so what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't make me dumb. It just makes me I don't know. There's a difference, okay? But I think our culture, and I think what I was getting to it before. I think our culture is shifting. I think it's allowing our culture is allowing men to become more who they want to be from inside out. I don't think we're there yet, but I've seen it more now than ever. Uh, so so I think the culture gives a message. Then the other question is, what other messages do men have around them that encourages them to become an individual? Uh, their relationship with the partner they're in, is it evolved enough that each person in the connection allow each person, like you and your wife, to be able to be individuals and be together. And so it depends on friendship. It depends on the jobs. uh, I don't. It's a great question. I'm going to have to think about that because I don't know um, how to send the message that it's all right to be a male in our culture and also be who you want to be from your heart. How can you find a place to work and to earn a living and to feel good? I think the idea what a lot of people who come to my office ask me, so how do I know how I want to live? I said, well, you know what? You have a perfect roadmap. And I said, here's the perfect roadmap. Do what your heart tells you to do. So one of my friends gave me a little, I always keep this. I'll show it to you and I'll read it to you. It says, do more of what makes your heart happy. You see,
Yep.
so that is the roadmap. I know it took me, I have to tell you, it took me a lot of years to get here. And so I think, so what's in our culture that encourages men to do what makes their heart happy rather than going out and making a buck and you know taking care of the family and bringing home the bacon? Because our culture, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. Our culture, uh, I'm expected. Part of being a male, no matter where we are on this planet, our job is to go out and bring home the bacon. I mean, that's been about 2 or 3 million years of human evolution. That hasn't changed. We still are expected. Maybe it's changing now because of I don't know what it's. I'm still kind of in the old school, but I'm watching my children, uh, my sons work, their wives work. They share the babies together, and I mean, so it is changing, and I think men are being allowed to to pursue their heart. But I don't know how to get that through to men, which is what I
Yeah.
think you're asking.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit, and it's if somebody had the answer, we'd be doing it, right? But I think just
Exactly.
continuing to ask the question and be open to it is what's important. And like you acknowledge, we're in the middle of some pretty major societal shifts in norms right now. You mentioned gender earlier, relationship dynamics, racial things that are going on. I mean, there's so much that's happening right now. It's really incredible. But the thing that you mentioned earlier about hearts or leading from our heart, listening to your heart, got me thinking about the archetypes that you and Kevin introduced to me the last time that
Oh
we
yeah,
chatted.
right. Yeah.
Can you talk about those a little bit? I have to admit I'm probably 10% of the way through the book, so I'm getting like the early glimpses of the different archetypes. But it's
Oh,
the
you mean?
lover, the
Oh,
magician, the
no,
king.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the
Right.
warrior's the other one.
Yeah, yeah. This is very. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Again, um, Robert Moore is a lot of the men's work has been influenced by Carl Jung, and Carl Jung was the early psychiatrist who came up with these ideas of archetypes, and archetypes are these very uh, kind of almost deeply embedded uh, ways of being that he believed anyway. It's a theory, so I don't know if it's true or not. But anyway, he believed that we come up with these very very deep ways of being that we carry that we human beings carry, and he calls them archetypes, and they're kind of like uh, uh, I don't know how to even put the words. They're a certain kind of a constellation of energy, and one is like. The the divine child archetype, which he talks about. Little children are like like baby Jesus is an archetype. The of that archetype. Uh, Robert Moore, who is a Jungian analyst, he took that idea and he said he proposed these four archetypes that are part of our own masculine way. So he masculine makeup. So the king, warrior, um, magician, and lover. And he says these are the so the lover basically has to do with heart connection, uh, and feelings and emotions. So he says that that's kind of what guides us. Then he talked about the warrior. The warrior is about conquering and moving forward and taking over and planting your foot in the ground. Uh, the king is more like the archetype, the spirit of you being able to. You're like husband in your you as the male in your home. You kind of husband your family. You're kind of like you're the king, not the king. Like a bad king, but that's kind of that. Your energy is to kind of watch over, just like your
Mm.
wife's energy is the queen energy. So those are energies. So if you kind of think about them as energies, so when you're taking care of your family, you're kind of like husbanding or taking. You're like the king kind of energy. When you are doing a lot of the work and you talk to other men or you talk to your wife with your heart, then you're using your lover archetype is coming out. Uh, the the warrior, of course, is when you put your foot down and you say this is how it's going to be. Not that you're going to be a dictator, but you hold your ground, kind of. And the magician has to do with intelligence, our intelligence, our creativity, those I think these kind of magical things that we human beings can do, art. So
Mm.
so what Robert Moore did is he helped. He was very very influential, I think, for both the Mankind Project and for Victories particularly, because he's here in Chicago and he really informed Victories, and the Mankind Project started up in Milwaukee. So he was so he helped he influenced both of our programs. So what happened was that Mankind took the warrior archetype spirit, and they organized their weekend around helping men to go on their weekend and learn how to have power. Not the good power or bad power, but no, but just recognizing that they have a lot of power inside of them. So that's so the warrior weekend, which is what it's the warrior weekend of the Mankind Project. That's what that does. Uh, Victories, on the other hand, we veered off and we took the lover archetype, and so our weekend, you got to have a lot of power and courage to do our weekend. So you can't be weak. But the accent is connection, relationship. So what happens with the men who come out of our weekends, it's about how do we connect men together. The motto of our weekend is connect, discover, and thrive. So our weekend is about connection. It's about connection to yourself and who you are, connection to the men because they form a brotherhood. So the men who do the weekend, they form a group, and then they continue afterwards, and so then they connect to other men, so they're not isolated. So that when they have a problem or they're struggling at home, they have this group of men that they can go and talk to. So that's what we do. So our weekend, the warrior weekend, they also have groups that follow up after the weekend. I did their weekend also, and I stayed in their follow up group for about 10 years.
Wow.
But so the point is that it's about the same thing. The accent is on lover and connection, and with the warriors, it's about getting enough power to be who you want to be. So it's
How do the accents or the archetypes show up for you in your everyday life, or do they?
great question. I don't know. At this age, they all mixed up. I don't know where I'm at anymore half the time. But I think it comes through. Yeah, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. Well, I tell you how it comes through in my work when I work with people now. Uh, when I'm working with, this is the way I've been transformed as a psychiatrist. Uh, I call myself more of a humanistic psychiatrist now than regular, because I really believe that the heart part of me comes through in my compassion and kindness and worry for the people who are my patients who are struggling, who are depressed or they're suicidal. And so I feel more empathy and compassion for them. Not that I lose my work because I also know what I got to do, but I'm able to not be so manly and do you got to I can do that, but I balance it off with how do I treat them. Do I treat them like an object, or do I treat them as a human being with respect, who is suffering? It helped me because I'm a better I'm a better psychiatrist. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. Uh, so it comes through this. So these archetypes. So, for instance, this discussion that we're having, uh, I've been using a lot of my magician, because my magician is I like to talk. I like poetry. I'm animated. So I don't know if I'm answering, and then some kind of way. I know you're running the show. You're kind of like the king right now, but once in a while I jump in and I take over a little bit, and then I pull back again.
I love it. I love it. No, I
Am
think
I
that's
making
great.
sense to you?
Yeah, it's so helpful to see things in or hear about things in action, right? To be able to take a concept and be like, oh, okay, I can see the parts of my life when these different archetypes might show up. Do you
Great
have?
question, by the way.
Do,
Great
do you
question.
have like a primary archetype though that you show up as?
Gosh, if anything, I probably am more the lover now than ever.
And has
I
that
used
changed throughout your life in
Oh my
retrospect?
God, I used to be a hard ass when I was back there. You didn't know me when I was 30 and 40. I was a terror. None of the nurses wanted to ever see me on the unit because they said, Kachoris is coming. Because I'm not the man now that I was then. I was much more disciplined, and I ran a hospital I ran a psychiatric hospital of 100 patients. We had, and I was the medical director, and we had psychiatrists and psychologists, and so I ran that tight ship. So I was the warrior. I was the king. Uh, Magical, not too much lover. I think what's happened to me is I've allowed my lover to come forth. And my answer, I don't know. I'm answering the question the best I can.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It makes me think about how I think that I've always wanted to be the lover, and like I'm kind of flashing back now. Early in my professional career, and I mean, you start to become a teen, and you realize that like you have to be this warrior. The programming, the norms tell you that you got to go be this warrior, and it never felt right to me, and it was exhausting, and I hated it, but I did it anyways. And now looking back, oh God, some of the ways that I've treated
You're
people as a manager and stuff is just like crappy.
you're lucky. You're really, really fortunate for you and for your family, your children, that you're making this shift. The fact that you're doing this work, you already broken through.
Something like that. We'll find out. Ask me in a year how I'm doing, and we'll have a
Sure.
follow-up
Well,
conversation.
I'd like to stay connected to you because I like you a lot. I respect you. I want to encourage your work. When you asked me to do this, I wanted to do it not so much, not for me, but for you, and to really to support you and to empower all the work you're doing, because it's you young men and women, but particularly you young men, have to take this thing forward. You really do. It's the only way out. I'm convinced of it. We can't
Well,
we
I
cannot we cannot be the men that we used to be. It's not good. It's toxic.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful to have you on this journey with me, and to have your support and those kind words. It means a lot for somebody that's been doing this work for so long, and having been a psychiatrist and all the work that you've done in that profession. I mean, there's a lot of work ahead of us, not just for men, but humans in general, with taking care of what's going on up in here and the impact that it has on the rest of us.
Absolutely. Uh, That's why what we feel and think is so crucial. And so, as a psychiatrist, I've learned how the mind works a little bit better when I know the biochemistry of the mind and all that. But ultimately, uh, it's what's in between these two ears that that that's the world. That's the world. Each one of us lives in our own world, and that world has to be as healthy as possible. Because if the inside world is okay, then we can really affect a lot the outside world. And so it's just a very, very good work.
There you go. Well, I always end these shows with some parting wisdom. So what advice would you like to leave the mostly men probably that are listening out there when it comes to masculinity, their mental health, or anything that we talked about today?
Uh, I think it's very, very simple. It's my little wisdom. Do more of what makes your heart happy. That's my wisdom. So do more of what makes your heart happy. And the more you do it, the earlier you do it in your life, the better. Don't wait to
I
be
love it.
50. Don't wait to be 49. And that's when I did it. Do it at 34 or 30. Okay? That's my wisdom.
That is good wisdom. I'll add that to my daily reminders that I look at for sure, because that's the one that I love, and it's now a part of it. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being here. I have a ton of good stuff to add to the show notes afterwards. So everything we talked about, books, organizations, workshops, all that, we'll make sure that it gets in there for anybody who's watching now or later on. But thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I just so if anybody wants to know about our program, they can always check with victoriesformen.org and also on Facebook if they want to know more about our weekends and all of that. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah, I will make sure that it's in here. All right, everybody. Well, thank you if you tuned in live with us tonight. As always, and just feel so grateful that you take some time to come and hang out with us. I hope that you learned something from all of Paul's wisdom that he got to share with us today, from his experience with getting involved with men's work and kind of his different wake-ups and discoveries as a man out there in the world. And always, thanks again, Paul, for being here with us tonight. So take care, go and find what sets your heart on fire, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to The Mandate with your host, Adam Hoffman. It's time to do your part in raising awareness of men's mental health, shifting the stigma, and having a positive impact on someone's life. Share this episode with a friend who could use some support and post it on your social channels. Have questions or thoughts? Text Adam at 512-980-3935. Find more episodes, upcoming live shows, and life-changing resources at mandateshow.com. Your mandate is to take your mental health seriously. Be courageous, stay vulnerable, live authentically. Until next time, y'all.